Today, we're going to talk a lot about process now that we have discussed kind of everybody's background. Maybe feel like you've gotten to get to know us a little bit. But today we're going to talk about, if you were going to apply with us and move forward, what kind of role each person plays. And so when I'm speaking about, the loan officer or the person that's, quoting rates and things of that nature, I'm speaking for both Drew and myself on how this process works. Really, one of the things that started my career a little bit of like why I became so interested in mortgage is because I thought the process of mortgage was just really not good. I thought it was terrible. When I first got into the business or would talk about it in 2017, I just was always amazed about either how long the process took, how much effort and documentation it might take, what was accepted for underwriting and what was rejected. I became really kind of fascinated by how quick I could do something. And, back then I was working for Citizens Bank, and I knew I kind of fell into a career opportunity when I started to have really, the outcomes or the results were really surprising. Like to be able to, for especially work at a bank, to be able to close a loan in under 14 days just wasn't really talked about. Mortgage companies can typically close a little bit faster. First Heritage is a mortgage company, so we have a lot of speed over here, in my opinion. But it's one of the first things that I kind of recognized where I could stand out compared to other loan officers or businesses or companies that offer mortgages. Because if you're able to execute quickly, real estate agents love it, clients love it. It's just an overall better experience for people when you don't have to take, 40 to 70 days to close on a real estate transaction. The process for me kind of starts with some of the things I just mentioned, which is, good information up front. If you really want your mortgage to go well, the better information you provide up front, especially if you do it upon the first request, just generally the better the process is going to be. If you take 5, 6, 7, 8 days to get documents that were requested, regardless of the mortgage company you work with, it's going to feel like a more difficult process because somebody with that other mortgage company, another client, is willing to send documents within a few hours. And that person that's willing to take 7 or 8 days, well, obviously they fall to the bottom of the list. So it's really important for when, a loan officer like Drew or myself request documents that you get those documents to us quickly and they're accurate and you follow the list. Like, for example, if you have a bank statement, you want to include all pages of the bank statement, right? You don't want to be missing a page. Even if it says intentionally left blank, and it's the 6th page of 1 of 6, we still have to have the 6th page.
Yeah, I like the point. We don't know what is on that page unless we have it.
That's right. So it's important that, Drew and I send a very detailed list of, part of being proficient in this job and really being able to have great results. Like I just talked about, closing in under 2 weeks, for example, is because whoever you're working with, whether it's Drew or myself or somebody else, the list of documents that we go through with the client and send an email follow-up so they have the visual and itemized list is, it is with a purpose. It's not without structure. We go through every item they might need. And it really does make the process better for especially my processing team, which is really starts with Betty and then goes to Kellie, right? So, once you apply with Drew and I and you get that itemized list of documents, then really the next part is Betty's role, which is a lot of compliance of a DocuSign and things of that nature. And so I'm gonna let Betty tell you a few things of what she does in her role. She's been doing this for 20 plus years. She's got a ton of experience. She basically trained me when it comes to looking at a lot of documents. So I want to give her that credit for sure and let her tell her opinion about how the process works, especially in the beginning where she's the most critical.
Yep. So as Alex said, you apply online and then basically we do have compliance. You have to e-consent in order to do all your e-signing online as far as like your initial disclosures. Your first is your e-consent, and that's just to say that I will and I agree to sign all my documents online. And then once you key your you're keying your own application, but then we have to go in behind you because there are compliance stuff that I have to finish filling out the application. And then once we get it ready, I kind of review it with Drew and Alex, make sure all of our fees are correct. If there's any seller credits or anything like that, we want to make sure it's in the file up front. And then once we get all that, and then we send the file to our compliance department, they're going to send you guys out your initial disclosures. Usually me, Drew, or Alex will reach out to you to say, hey, your disclosures are ready for you to sign. We actually print normally the loan estimate. Drew and Alex usually go over it with the clients. And then once your file, basically you sign all your docs, it's ready to go to processing. We do review all your documents that you upload online. Make sure you have most recent 30-day pay stubs, your bank statements are most 30 days current. And of course, there are some clients that have, some we need tax returns on, and then, it can get deeper where you need corporate returns and stuff like that. So, but once we have your file, we review all your documents, we send the file on to Kellie, who processes and gets it she's our liaison between us and underwriting. And I'll let Kellie explain how she goes.
One thing I'd like to interject is the appraisal process. So you didn't, after they sign these disclosures that people DocuSign, that's when we order the appraisal. So it is important that customers really execute these DocuSign documents, because the appraisal cannot be ordered until they acknowledge receipt of these documents for compliance reasons.
And paid.
And pay.
And they pay it through a secure email online.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
There is no application fee. You pay only for the appraisal after you've agreed to the documents and signed them.
Correct.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
And one of the, just to go back a little bit to what Betty said, complete file, making sure things are organized in the correct items for underwriting. If you do those type of things, like we just had an example where I have a client that applied like mid-November, they're already approved and they're not closing till November 20th. And it just goes to show you, before Kellie talks, she really knows what she's doing if she's able to close a loan 3 weeks in advance of the house needing to be owned, right? It's 3 weeks in advance. I mean, there's nothing left to do. And it was basically a roughly a 10-day process. And we didn't even need to process it that fast. But that just shows you some of the execution and the speed that mortgage companies can have. So it's always fun to work with Kellie because she's had so much experience. She knows what she's looking for. So I'm going to let her tell her part about processing and underwriting.
Thank you, Alex, but definitely a team effort, but I appreciate it. Okay, so when it comes to me, what I'm going to do before I send it to underwriting is I'm going to review all your documents for accuracy. So when you send in your documents, I'm going to make sure that your income is listed, your assets are listed, the things that are required for that particular loan program that you applied for. I'm making sure that it's correct, it's accurate, and also I can explain it and prove it. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm cross-referencing it with, like the compliance section for the federal, state, whatever the lender guidelines are. I'm making sure that they meet those minimum requirements. Once I meet those minimum requirements, I send them to the underwriter for review. I usually wait until the underwriter reviews the file. Of course, I'll send you like some type of communication that it's been moved. If not, if I see something wrong with the documentation, I'm going to reach out and I'm going to ask you to send me an updated document or whatever I'm missing. Like Alex said, if there's a missing page, like we have to have all pages. Like unfortunately, we just need to make sure that if we don't see it, we don't know it, like Drew said. And then once it comes out of underwriting and you're conditionally approved, the underwriter will condition for additional documents based on what you provided. And as Betty said, depending depending on how you make your living, it can vary. I've honestly, some, W-2 earners or wage earners are pretty similar, but when you get into businesses and things of that sort, no one can be the same. It's always different. And, we want to make sure that we're following the compliance and also asking for what the underwriter needs. With that being said, once we get those documents, Same thing, back to touch on what Alex said, the quicker you get us back the docs, the better. The reason why is because once we get those satisfied and clear through underwriting, all we're waiting on is the third-party documents at that time. Your appraisal to come back, your title to come back, and your homeowner's insurance that you chose. I have to reach out and get our mortgagee clause on for closing or whatever that may be. If you're in a flood zone, things of that sort. It helps us with the process. Like Alex said, if you want to close in 3 weeks, it's doable, but we got to have you also help us as well. I also call you guys, introduce myself, help you with the process. If anything comes up that's, like a fire or something goes sideways, I'm going to call you quickly and we're going to get it resolved the best that we can. But other than that, once we get everything done, I send them back over to the underwriter. They approve the loan for final approval. And then I send you an email or call you, let you know that you're ready for closing. And I don't think I missed anything, but if I did, you guys can definitely let me know. But that's pretty much processing in a nutshell. Pretty boring, but that's what I'm here for.
Well, it can be riveting. It's a lot of paperwork, right? We've obviously we've nailed that down for the audience that accuracy is very important. But I think one thing that is kind of, there's sometimes where situations, especially if it's a borrower that has, multiple assets of IRA, checking account, savings account, business account, et cetera, Kelly and the underwriter might reach out for an account. And I just had this happen for an example. It's a real life example. They had additional assets of life insurance. They had, a whole variety of assets. And when you provide a 401k, it's required by underwriting guidelines that you have a summary plan that talks about the withdrawal of the 401k. Now, we know that clients aren't going to withdraw from it, but it just is what's required, and it's not something that we're able to control. And so you have to get these what's called terms of withdrawal, which is in the summary plan of your 401k. And it can be a little bit of a pain to obtain, maybe a phone call or some digging online. It's not always super easy, especially if you switched employers, as an example. And so, we were having some pushback because, Kelly and the underwriter asked for a 401k, and the client said, I don't understand why I have to provide a 401k in the summary plan, basically. And, I was able to get that removed as a requirement because of the way I structured the assets. And additionally, another way that kind of explains some of Kelly's roles is that, if a document, like let's say that there's discrepancy of a document being approved, right? If there's a question about, for example, if someone had disability income, and if you're able to increase the income because it's not taxable, she could call the institutions, Fannie and Freddie, and say, hey, here's my income documentation. It's tax-free. Can you provide the underwriting requirements to allow it to be a higher amount of income because it is tax-free? That government entity shoots back that information to Kelly. Then she takes that to the underwriter and says, hey, look, I know you may have not used a higher income because you weren't anticipating it based upon what you knew, but the requirements by who's going to purchase the loan, which is essentially the government, say that you can use a higher income. Well, then they go, okay, you can use the higher income. And so Kelly can essentially fight and win, more income scenarios or more asset scenarios. She's really a pivotal part of the process to be able to overcome some of the challenges that borrowers, don't think about in the process. They're like, oh, I just qualify. And then even behind the scenes, we may not even tell you that they weren't using a higher income because it's tax-free, but Kelly was able to overcome that without anybody really ever knowing, right? And that's really what you want, in my opinion, when it comes to any business that you work in, whether it's a restaurant, mortgage, you name it. When your ops team can solve problems and you don't know about them, that's when you have results like closing in 2 weeks, right? And so I think one last piece to mention that, unfortunately, I don't have this person on the call, is that there is someone called a closer, and they coordinate with the attorney or with the title company to send out the final documents to be signed to own your transaction or own the real estate or refinance the transaction, et cetera. And the closers are really important part too, because I always say once Kelly gets the loan cleared to close, you're really not done. You really have another probably 4 to 6 hours for that final loan package to sign to own the real estate. That package usually takes 4 to 6 hours. And so when you have a large amount of clients, companies or mortgage companies will dedicate people to your ops team. So like Kellie, for example, is a dedicated processor to my team and Drew's team. And I also have a dedicated closer. So I work with the same closer, and I work with the same processor every time. And when you have, that type of process, again, that's when you can have really great results. So I think that's pretty much the few things I wanted to touch on today. Drew, if you want to make any points, you've obviously been doing this longer than anybody here. I know you probably don't like to hear that, but
I mean, I think what everybody's saying is great. I think, and it really is a great team to work with. And it's hard to put this kind of thing together in a company, to be honest with you. Especially bigger companies just don't allow teams to really work this tightly together as we do here. And being that independent, relatively small company really gives us the ability to work together as a team. And I think that's one thing I'd like to say. I do think that we use the term assets and make sure that customers understand what are assets. Assets really your down payment. Where's your down payment source? We have to make sure we know where your down payment's coming from. So when we use the word assets, we're really talking about your down payment. Don't you agree, guys?
Yeah,
Yep.
money.
Right. And so that's just, consumers might go, what kind of asset are they talking about? If you've not applied for a mortgage recently or thinking about it, when we use the term asset, we're looking for your down payment source, your liquid accounts and stuff like that. So I will say that when Alex talks about giving the file to a closer and taking 4 to 6 hours, you can't do that at other large companies. When I worked at B of A and Citizens, we sometimes took a day or two after clear to close to get a package to close to attorney. And part of it is because we didn't have a signed closer and didn't work as well together as a team like we're able to do here. And so that's when he says 4 to 6 hours, that's really quick. Not everybody does need to close in 3 weeks. We do have clients that come to us and are not in a 3-week hurry. We don't want to indicate that every loan we take, we try to close in exactly 3 weeks. We're not trying to force you to close. We want you to close on your schedule, your time. It's just that we have the ability to actually get the process basically done for you in 3 weeks. Think of it that way. And then you've got maybe 5 or 6 weeks till closing, but you don't have anything else to do. I mean, how often do you hear mortgage companies and customers say, well, I was ready to close 2 weeks before I actually closed. Yesterday, I locked the rate for somebody, and guess what? His package is getting ready to go to the attorney, and he's cleared to close. All we had to do was get his rate locked. And so that's just something that's really hard to replicate in a lot of people. The other thing I'd like to say is that Betty talked about the things that she does in getting things out and how we like to call people and really let them know these DocuSign documents are coming. I really don't like for people to get documents by DocuSign and somebody not follow up and call them. So a real big habit of like texting you and letting you know, hey, your docs have been delivered to your email. Call us if you've got questions, or maybe even I'll call you in 2 hours, or call me if you'd like to go over your documents. Not everybody wants us to go over documents with them, but we can. The other thing I'd like to point out is that you don't have to apply online. You can do it the old-fashioned way. And there's still a 20 or 30% group that likes to do that. And so if you don't want to apply online, we simply do an interview with you and ask you your application questions. So we're just going to do a 5-minute interview or 10-minute interview with asking for your address, social security, date of birth, and things of that nature. I still like doing it that way for a lot of customers, to be quite honest with you, because it allows us to have a process to get to know each other better. And so if you want to get to know your loan officer better, whether it's Alex, we still do take applications over the phone, so to speak, or in person. And if you're really got questions or you're a first-time home buyer and you're local, we certainly will welcome you to our office. We have a beautiful office. You can see Betty's there always with a nice sign behind it. Alice is the nice office. It's really a nice professional building as well as office itself. So we'd love to invite you in to come see it. I think that's it. I don't want to take too much more time, Alex. I think, and Betty, I'm just glad to be part of this team, and it's fun to work here.
All right. Thanks everybody for your time. I know Kelly's got to run, and we'll go from there next time.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thanks.